Hi guys. So today I'm going to be talking about autism, and I know there's going to be some memes made out of this. Now, I've worked in the mental health industry before when I was not necessarily normie, but when I was playing sneaky Nazi, and I've got a fair bit of experience actually working with autistic children and disadvantaged kids and criminal youth and stuff like that. And what I'll say is that all the science is wrong. All modern science, almost all modern science is wrong. There's very little that you can trust. And I'm not going to get into, too much in that regard because I really want to stay on the topic of autism and what it really is. I made a post earlier saying that autism isn't real and that I'm going to do a podcast about it. I've decided to do a video instead. I might end up doing a podcast of some sort about the subject because it is such a big subject, and this video will be pretty long. So to cut into it, in short, autism is simply the lack of training of the human condition. So all real human beings, all thinking humans, because you kind of have to divide humans into social humans and thinking humans. A social human is just a zombie. They're just a moron. They're just a serf. They're a bread and circuses retard, and they can't actually ever achieve any higher level of understanding of anything. And we have such an excess population, even within the white population these days, that most people, basically everyone that went and got vaccinated is like a social human, like they're completely retarded, like they have no instincts. Now, all the people that didn't get vaccinated are kind of in two groups. They're independent thinkers, and those independent thinkers can be broken into two groups. There are independent thinkers that can present as normal people, so you can present as a social human even though you're not. So you have to, while you live in this world of social humans, these social beings, you have to pretend that you are like a robot like them, but you're really not. You're a completely different being. And what an autist is, or what we define as an autist, is really just someone that hasn't learned how to blend in with those people yet. And they haven't been, I'll break into an even more important way of looking at autism. If you're a parent with an autistic child, you're autistic yourself, you're diagnosed. I've met a lot of diagnosed autistic people. I think if I was not so capable of hacking my own mind and hacking my own discipline and being able to actually be a productive individual, and a socially capable individual and learn social cues, I think most people within the movement would probably be described as autistic. One of the obvious signs is things like hyperfixation, if you're hyperfixed on a subject. But anyway, I'll break into the most important stuff on the subject of autism, and that is, there's always been nerds. There's always been nerds. Growing up, there was always a nerd in your class. These days, it's not a nerd anymore. It's not a nerd, it's an autistic kid. And now you've got autistic kids in your class. If you're going through school right now, it's, the class is full of autistic children. That's not how it was. How it was back in the day was there was a couple nerds, and these nerds got bullied. And what happened when these nerds got bullied, either physically or emotionally or both, socially, I should say, physically or socially, what it did was it forced them to conform to social norms. So if you're like 15 years old and you've still got a teddy bear on your bed, you're going to get bashed by socially normalized, I should say, 15-year-olds. You're going to get bashed. And now that they've sort of made kids soft in school, you're not going to get bashed. You're just going to get like traumatized by, through sort of social bullying, emotional bullying. And, so these autists that are like, they can't talk to girls and they have a teddy bear on their bed and they're like 20 years old, like there's actually nothing really that wrong with them. What's wrong with them is they've been coddled. So we used to bash nerds, we used to bully nerds, and now we coddle them. Now we're like, oh, you have a disability, you're autistic, and we treat them like that they're fucking retarded. They're not. They're actually usually a lot smarter than all these retards watching the football, drinking beer, and going, oh yeah, we did it, we won, go Victoria, we won, yeah. Like they're the brain dead retards in society, and we're living in a society that doesn't know how to manage people properly, and so it's calling them autistic. And almost all of these young men that are being put in this pigeonhole as being like intellectually, socially disabled because, they learn slow. It's not that they learn slow, it's that they're not being taught. And they don't have strong fathers. And they have mothers that are over coddling. So it's a single mum issue. That's one of the biggest things. It's a trauma issue. If you look into spirituality or religion, you'll note that all life is suffering. And if children don't suffer appropriately, if they suffer too much too early, or they don't learn how to process suffering or process trauma, we call it trauma these days. Everything's trauma. Everyone's got post-traumatic stress disorder. Someone shouted at me, I got PTSD. It's all bullshit. Right? Life is suffering, life is trauma, and it's how we grow. And we can't actually grow without trauma. And autistic children with what is now defined as autism, I have to learn how to undo this psychobabble bullshit, fake psychology, fake science language. We all do. We all have to learn how to undo it. It's going to take a long time. But for now, if I call them autistic, just give me a break. Don't say I'm a hypocrite. But it's the coddling that's making it worse. And this is a symptom of the Kali Yuga, the age of chaos, the feminine energy being dominant over the masculine energy. And there needs to be a balance. I'm not saying it's all masculine. If there's only masculine energy and there's no feminine energy, you live in a desert. It's a desert. It's too much struggling. And that's what I think a lot of the Gnostics tried to do. They went, if we only suffer, we'll get enlightenment. And they got enlightenment out in the desert for sure. But you only need to do that if you've been too coddled. You need to spend some time in the desert and come back. If you haven't had a male role model, if you're a young guy, and, I used to always say I had a lot of autistic guys, again, I did it again, a lot of diagnosed autistic young guys in the group, like back in the day. Not so much these days, there's still a couple, but it was probably 20% back in the day, which is probably a bigger percentage than the general population. And I used to say to all of them, join the army. And not because of some Fed post, like, learn to use guns, like ASIO tries to make it out. It's literally that a lot of them have single mums, a lot of them have trauma that they haven't dealt with, and they haven't learned how to man up. And they're just forever children. They're just stuck in this child. Like if they had trauma I'm not going to go into detail. I don't want to talk about people's personal stories. But I had a guy that had a lot of trauma when he was 12 years old. And so he never really socially developed past 12 because something really bad happened to him. And, he was sort of stuck in that 12-year-old mindset and dropped out of school. And I took him under my wing, and for 2 years, I taught him everything that I knew. I became like his big brother, and I taught him how to lift, and I taught him how to fight, and, I taught him how to talk to girls. And after 2 years of just intense bullying, really intense bullying, he became like a normal person, like an almost completely normal person. Like you wouldn't be able to tell that 2 years ago, he was like stuck in like a 12-year-old's mindset and body. What I'm saying is that this autistic diagnosis is what's damaging them. There's actually nothing wrong with them except environment, in terms of they haven't had the right mentoring from the right male role models. And with women, with female autists, probably they don't have the right mentoring from female role models. So everyone that's intelligent is going to be on that spectrum. Anyone with any sort of intelligence, unless you're dog shit retard and you went and took the vaccine and you sit there like bummed out, like, you're a fucking full on the dopamine loop, like you're full brain rot. You can't independently look at information. You can't independently look at the past or history or the future. You can't see that we're getting ethnically replaced around you. You're just a full retard normie. Then none of this really applies to you, but you'll just fit into society. You're like a social animal. One of the best ways to put it is the more intelligent or the more advanced or developed an animal or species is, the more upbringing it requires, the more mentoring and training it requires. And this is not correlation, not causation. This is causation. This is a reality. This is all science is wrong. Like all this modernity science is all wrong. They don't get it. They don't understand it. None of these experts understand autism. If you've got, a fucking cow or a sheep or a dog, it can walk within the first day of its life, or, really, really quickly, sometimes the first hour, but the more complex, the more advanced an organism is, the longer its period of time to develop is. So, this diagnosis of autistic, it's not correct. They're just late bloomers. They're very intelligent. They're a higher organism that requires more mentoring, more development, and most importantly, more struggle. So an appropriate amount of trauma, like a good, healthy amount of trauma. And so I always say to these autistic young guys, go join the army, go to boot camp. It'll straight up, it won't fix you, but it'll full build your character, And I say to them, go get a trade. Go get a trade. Go do higher learning. Go challenge yourself. They're not being challenged. None of these autists are being challenged. If you go get a trade, then you have to get an apprenticeship, and this guy that's 30 or 40 or 50 that's fucking impatient and he's a man, he's going to scream and shout at you for 3 years until you fucking switched on. And that's what autists need. They need someone to scream and shout at them for like 2 or 3 years, just constantly berating them. And they just need to learn to do as they're fucking told and just achieve the task and then achieve the next task and learn how to control that hyperfixation. Because if they don't, they're just going to get hyperfixated on something that's fucking dumb, like anime or computer games or fucking Joe Rogan podcast or something like that. So they need to learn to condition their hyperfixation into something that they don't want to do. And that's part of manhood. That's part of growing up. And so these autists are stuck in this childlike stage, and they could become Ubermensch. Every autist I've ever met could become an Ubermensch. I'm telling you, they're a higher race of Aryan. And they have the ability to achieve so much more. But the problem is that they're not putting themselves in suffering. They're not putting themselves in struggle, and they're not challenging themselves enough. And the system isn't challenging them. The system is coddling them. Their mothers are coddling them, and their fathers are usually too laid back, laissez-faire, or just not present, or just not there. And this is a pandemic in society. And if people understand autism, if they understand what autism actually is, because the diagnosis is lazy, and the diagnosis it's like a falsity. It's a false reality. It's creating a problem instead of solving it. When you diagnose a child as autistic, you're not solving the problem. You're creating a problem now, because now you're putting a label and you're labeling that child as disabled, and you're going to make the child worse. 50